A Japanese city filled with blue sky was exposed to a Japanese student's gaze through the school's fencing netting right on the roof. Now all the students have been released. School friends are smilingly talking to each other, while our MC looks on from above. The MC's bloody face lets us know that he's just been bullied, and the hero himself declares that it's probably time to put an end to this bullshit game. He squeezes the netting around him with all his might, causing it to bend a little. You're so useless. Our hero is now being beaten by his father and mother. They stand in front of him and address Rikuto, saying that he again did not clean his room. Their eyes filled with anger, the father clenched his fist and prepared to hit Rikuto, justifying himself by saying that his son was negligent for not cleaning his room. Rikuto, fixing the blood and covering his face, looked at his father a little as he began to show signs of beastliness and clenched his teeth and changed his face. The father started kicking his son, saying that it was his duty to keep the house in order, the mother adding fuel to the fire by asking him who would give him a roof over his head if anything happened. When his mother says that his birth parents are pathetic for raising Rikuto this way, she laughs, but Rikuto describes them simply, shitty, foster parents. Yeah, it's sad, I don't like the beginning. But wait, things will change soon. Rikuto then quietly slams the door and walks into another room where he is greeted by a handsome brother with white hair and an earring in his ear who smiles and says it's his fault. The idiot pours the drink from the bottle onto the floor and says with a sarcastic smile that it was his fault. Rikuto's eyes immediately darken when he sees this and realizes that his parents will beat him up for this as well. The half-brother walks up to Rikuto and puts his hand on his shoulder and asks him, "Am I not kind?" Rikuto just stands there holding his breath. Furthermore, Rikuto's half-brother continues to lash out at him and with a smile begins to press on his shoulder and tell Rikuto that he is giving him something that gives him some value in his worthless life. Rikuto clenches his fist and then describes him as a shitty older brother. After the bell rings, Rikuto arrives at his classroom and finds a vase of flowers and insults on his desk. The classmates were laughing, and while Rikuto was just looking at his desk, they all started to whisper among themselves, "He's just staring. Just die. What is he thinking? Damn, would you look at that? That's hilarious." At that moment, a joyful teacher enters the classroom and says that the lesson is starting, asking all the students to take their seats. However, the teacher notices that his desk is scribbled with insults. His face changes and he turns to Rikuto Kurogane and asks him, "What did he do to his desk, you idiot? Is he kidding?" Rikuto continued to stand in front of his desk and just stare at the vase of flowers in the scribbled desk, hearing his classmates insulting him in every way possible. Shitty school. After the bell rang for recess, Rikuto immediately flew backwards into the school lockers. The creepy bullies were grinding their teeth on Rikuto, 3 idiots in all, a white-haired man, a bald man with a bat, and a rooster. The rooster, by the looks of the glow stick addressing Rikuto's breathless body, asked the idiot why he didn't bring 2,000 yen directly into his hands today. Damn scum. Rikuto finally pulled himself together and clenched his fist with a cold face. But suddenly, Rikuto's gaze began to change in a more cloudy direction. Behind the idiot rooster appeared the silhouette of his brother, who stated that Rikuto will always remain a useless brat in the end. Rikuto catches the wildest trip seeing the rooster's face. He clenches his fist again in fear and takes another kick right in the stomach from the bully. Rikuto's gaze immediately blurred. He was already starting to lose all hope. After the bully hit Rikuto in the face with a straight low kick, everything around him was covered in blood. Rikuto's breathless body was beginning to lose all hope. Wounds began to appear on his face for the 100th time. The bully's henchmen started laughing as their idiot leader continued to beat Rikuto lying on the floor. The main bully kept pointing out that he had warned him that he should bring money. The bully also suggested that if he didn't have anything, he should have swiped something from his parents' wallet right for him. The other students were shocked at what they saw, and Rikuto kept getting punched in the face. After the bully leader started choking Rikuto, he realized that his life was complete shit. Everyone around him was complete shit. But at one point, the bully stopped and gave Rikuto a little rest, and Rikuto concluded his thought by saying that he was the shittiest. At one moment, a phone fell out of Rikuto's pocket and immediately bounced off the floor. The bully, wiping sweat from his fatigue, stared at the phone while Rikuto was silent at first. But at one moment, Rikuto reached for the phone, and it was shattered by the impact of the bully's foot. Rikuto, with his skinny and emaciated face, kept reaching for the phone, hearing the bully's sarcasm-filled apologies. The bully kept smiling and saying that his foot slipped. At one point, the asshole was about to hit Rikuto right on the head with a leg kick, while Rikuto just kept looking at his phone, which was broken because of the bullies. At one point, the asshole is stopped by a guy dressed in a light top and dark bottom with headphones around his neck and russet hair. The bully immediately turned his attention to the guy and stopped his foot. The unknown man was able to stop the bullying with a single word. "Stop it, you!" The students observing him immediately exclaimed, "This is Nishi!" The tall guy continued to stop the bully with just a glance, while the other students exclaimed, "The best on the archery team, that's Nishi Toya." Nishi was able to win the national archery tournament recently. A lot of high school girls immediately plunged into their love affair. One of the girls did not hesitate to exclaim and praise Nishi, saying that he is a wonderful person who even helps a loser like our MC Kurogane. The bully started sweating and getting angry and turned to Nishi and asked him what he wanted. The bully himself felt a great power from Nishi's hand. At one moment, the bald one of the bullies immediately prepared a bat and tried to attack him from behind. The bully kept shouting epic phrases. Nishi at that moment used his fist to stop the bald one, causing blood spurts everywhere. Nishi shut all the bullies up, telling them to stop doing that now. Nishi made a frightening face and said that they should go underground right now. Otherwise, Nishi was letting them know that they would soon get the full brunt of it. The head of the hooligans nervously removed his hand from his shoulder and started to walk away, leaving the baffled idiots who were surprised by their leader's behavior. Nishi sighed heavily as he gave the idiot a look. Then Nishi turned to Rikuto and sat down to start a dialogue with Rikuto. Nishi continued to stare at Rikuto's face, which was completely scarred. Nishi asked Rikuto if he was okay. Nishi also advised Rikuto to at least try to fight back. Rikuto continued to sit and stare at the broken phone and listen to Nishi's admonishment. They act like this just because Rikuto doesn't do anything back. Rikuto took his phone and then heard a question. "Is this any way to live?" Rikuto immediately stood on his own 2 feet, taking Nishi by surprise. Rikuto started to walk away from Nishi and asked him, "What does he even know about his life?" Rikuto only wrinkled his eyebrows as he looked at Rikuto walking away. Nishi continued to stare at Rikuto's epic walk away. Nishi mentally marveling at the fact that he was standing on his own 2 feet after being beaten so badly. Based on that, Nishi realized that he took less damage. Moreover, Nishi's eye opened as if he had eaten the coldest McFlurry. He realized that this guy was unknowingly dodging the asshole's punches. Nishi still has a hard time believing it though. It's not like they're in a movie. They're in a comic book, I'm just saying. That was the way before Rikuto found himself on top of the roof of a Japanese school. Dust was flying around. Rikuto kept clutching the net and looking at the people. They were laughing, having fun playing basketball and running around with a basketball sword. A guy was chatting with a girl. Other guys were having speed races. Rikuto immediately fell down and stood alone on the roof of the Japanese school. Rikuto continued to stare at his broken phone in silence. At one point, Rikuto's devastated look changed, and he declared, "This is the end." He was tired of this. Rikuto began to climb through the fence, climbing up the fence netting. Rikuto kept saying that his life was a torment. The net made a distinctive sound with each passing second. But Rikuto just kept climbing and climbing. And when he reached the top, he froze. After spreading his arms, Rikuto finally smiled and said, "It's time to end this crap game." Lightning flashed across the neighborhood, and magic circles began to appear in the sky. At that moment, similar magic circles started to appear all over the city, and strange projectiles started to be released from them, destroying the surroundings, buildings, and injuring people. The students immediately grabbed their phones, but at the same moment they received an electric shock. The students were consumed with panic. They immediately dropped their phone from their hands due to the strong electric shock. "What's going on here?" The students immediately started talking to each other in a panic. "What's going on? What the hell happened?" There was something wrong with the students' phones. Rikuto looked up at the sky with silence on his tongue and an equally devastated face. Rikuto kept looking up and wondering, lightning? Seriously? The weather is so nice. Rikuto kept looking up and wondering what the hell was going on. Suddenly, Rikuto's gaze drifted downward. The blonde-haired student's phone began to make magical sounds and recreate something. After that, a program code appeared on the screen, along with the same strange sounds. At that moment, something began to appear from the phone. It rushed upwards. In an instant, from the phone came out of the silhouette of a monster, on the body of which were numbers 0 and 1. It is very frightened the owner of the phone schoolboy. After that, the program code began to disappear from the goblin's body. Dragons, plant-like monsters, huge orcs, slimes, and goblins began to appear all over the world. Such a mass of monsters immediately rushed towards the schoolchildren, who were running away from them with fear on their faces. Rikuto smiled wryly as he heard the pleas for help from his familiar schoolmates. A goblin swatted one of the fleeing schoolchildren with a bat. The slime started eating people, and the goblins, seeing the girls, started creepily licking their fingers with their long tongue. Rikuto continued to watch this chaos in silence. The apocalypse had begun. Goblins were killing people, tearing their clothes. Everyone Rikuto knew before was now slowly dying. Rikuto saw one of the schoolchildren calling for his mother and continued to be silent as the atmosphere heated up. The monsters had completely taken over the world, laughing as they stood on a mountain of schoolchildren's corpses. What the hell? Unknown date, 21st century. Hordes of mysterious monsters suddenly appeared all over the world. At this moment, instantly the social order was disrupted. It is believed that the world's population was reduced by more than 10 times. The cause of the cataclysm remained unknown until a group of young people discovered the truth. The only thing that was known was that the monsters came out of cell phones. The survivors called it Doomsday. Okay, viewers, now you're not feeling it. How wonderful it is to be alive. Rikuto looked at the chaos going on around him and wondered, was it true? Rikuto mentally realized that monsters that only existed in fairy tales were now killing people right outside his favorite school. All of this is insanely unexpected. The madman laughed and said obsessively, "Shit! Ha 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 ha! I got it! I got it all! I've already jumped off and died!" The devastated face let us know Rikuto's attitude towards the situation. Around Rikuto continued to see goblins brutally strangling women, other students running away while other students were being killed by goblins. Pleas for help filled the school. Rikuto thought it was a death dream. The goblins started ripping their clothes off and made all the girls cry out for help. Spiders were creating cocoons on the guys' bodies to do stuff to them. Slimes were viciously consuming the freak of a teacher who had insulted Rikuto before. Rikuto started laughing obsessively and saying quietly, "How disgusting is this?" All those who despised him, laughing behind his back, writing nasty things directly on the desks, and the teacher who scolded him. All of them turned into trash in an instant. Rikuto smilingly heard the sounds of blood splashing and asked them a question. "What do you think? You were always bullying me." Rikuto continued to firmly state that they deserved it. Die, all of you. Rikuto watched as the monsters continued to kill the schoolchildren and asked them all to die. The pleas for help continued to echo around the school. Still, Rikuto almost slipped away and asked himself, embarrassed, if this was all too realistic for a dream. Everywhere were people he had not known before. After the oddly shaped monster killed another high school student with an axe cutting his body in half, Rikuto began to grind his teeth and holding his head began to cry, quietly screaming. Rikuto's hands began to shake like this whole body. Rikuto couldn't understand anything at all. He tried to stop the dream, asking how long. How much longer is this going to last? Rikuto's life is shit. His parents are dead. The society around him is shit. And that damn brother who smiled evilly and gave him huge trouble all the time. It didn't matter. None of them mattered. As if Rikuto cared. Still, a tear fell on Rikuto's hand. He stuttered and uttered, No, but Rikuto realized that he was acting wrong. He started sobbing like a first grader. When Rikuto saw the chaos that was going on, he shouted, "Stop it, please. If this is a dream, let me wake up." At that moment, the door to the roof shattered into pieces and slammed shut. Rikuto immediately turned around and saw a goblin coming at him with a bat. The goblin was pulling the man's head behind him, and his bloody blade was making him smile more and more every second. "Rikuto, is this a dream?" Rikuto realized it wasn't a dream. Rikuto also ate the McFlurry and opened his eyes as wide as possible. Rikuto realized that now, this is reality. The goblin immediately attacked Rikuto, who was trying to climb back over. The goblin was about to strike the panicking Rikuto. Rikuto managed to jump right off the fence, making the goblin miss. Rikuto continued to cry, and at one point crashed to the floor in blood. Rikuto began to whimper again and stood up mentally, saying he was scared. The goblin landed and got into a fighting stance. This is death. Rikuto continued to panic and wondered, is this how I'm going to die? From the other side of the fence, a hand began to immediately squeeze him. It was his ugly older brother who mockingly asked him, "What difference does it make?" The brother would turn to Rikuto and state that he was going to die anyway. Rikuto already wanted to put an end to this shit. Rikuto immediately fell silent, his disfigured face letting us know that in the end, his life had always been shit. "What's your problem, Rikuto?" Rikuto smiled in panic and said that the world was shit. Nothing would change if he died. Rikuto closed his eye and was determined to take the lunge of the goblin who, with an evil smile, already swung his baton at Rikuto. This is death. Chaos. Chaos. Rikuto began to grind his teeth and say he didn't want it that way. Not like this. Rikuto grabbed the iron near him. Rikuto started screaming that he didn't want to die. He started defending himself from the goblin's blow with his kind of crowbar to prevent the goblin's lunge. Rikuto was barely holding back the goblin's blade. At one point, the blade began to pierce the iron, and Rikuto was about to take critical damage. Rikuto started with a face that was filled with hope to repel the goblin's blow, telling him that real death is disgusting and miserable, too miserable. Rikuto, as if he had gotten an electric shock, Rikuto began to ask the evil goblin, knowing what death is like, who in their right mind would finally want to die? Rikuto started yelling, "No! No! I don't want to die!" At that moment, something in the world cracked, as if things were supposed to be different. Rikuto started screaming that he didn't want to die at all, so Rikuto began to fight back the goblin with all his might. The goblin had no intention of giving up, so he used his blade to kill him. Rikuto's body froze. He began to feel something very strange. Rikuto began to sink into the zone. People have a condition called zone, when concentration exceeds all limits regardless of the reason. Like a drop of water dropped into the ocean, a person enters a state of perfect control over their body and mind. It is said that when someone enters the zone state, he gets a complete awareness of the world around him and can reflexively make better decisions. For example, Rikuto had just kicked the goblin in the groin, causing him to roll around and scream in pain. Rikuto swung his iron and prepared to crush the goblin's head. Rikuto savored the piece of iron with a vicious face straight at the goblin. Rikuto completed the sacred ritual of striking. The iron that Rikuto used to defend himself was covered in blue blood, and the iron was crushed. Rikuto stood over the goblin that was covered in blue blood. Rikuto kept laughing like crazy. The goblin's head was destroyed. Suddenly, Rikuto began to feel strange urges. He immediately threw up right on the roof of the school. Wiping the vomit from his face, he screamed like a beast that had first slaughtered its target. Rikuto realized that he still hadn't really lived. He had been beaten up, his foster parents had bullied him, and Rikuto could only listen to his brother's taunts in return. Rikuto looked up at the sky in front of his defeated opponent and mentally told us how he felt that he didn't want to die. Rikuto began to feel wildly tired, and his head began to bleed. Rikuto's eyes immediately began to close. "Hey, you're okay. Wake up!" Rikuto opened his eyes when he heard a very familiar voice. There was a strange substance around Rikuto. What do you think it was? Rikuto opened his eye wide. Apparently, he had a McFlurry stuffed in his mouth. Nishi happily began to say, "You're alive! Thank God!" Rikuto was near Rikuto again at just the right moment. He was able to wake him up. Rikuto started to listen to Nishi, who explained to him that he was bleeding from his head. Nishi was already afraid that Rikuto was dead. Rikuto recognized the familiar guy as Nishi. Rikuto grimaced at the pain on his face and began to feel a strange sensation. Rikuto, fixing his face, got to his feet and started to hold his head. Nishi immediately exclaimed, "Hey, don't overdo it." Rikuto stood up against the red moon, a reference to Terraria. Rikuto smiled and quietly said, "No way." The city was covered in red flames. Yeah, these dudes don't know how to defend houses during a blood moon. Rikuto turned back in panic and saw all the people when he knew before. An interesting coincidence. They were all subjected to the deepest fear, and all they could do was shiver without realizing what was going on around them. Takeda, the cock who was shaking and wondering what was going on, was also here. The blonde-haired, panicked Tani, and the bald Arata, whose face looked like it happened every day. All three of them continued to shake with fear. Kuju Sakura, sitting on her knees, was still trembling and couldn't believe what was happening. At this point, the teacher hugged her from behind and, sweating a little, turned to Sakura and asked her to pull herself together. After all, the teacher was beside her. The teacher began to cheer up the panicking Sakura with a clenched fist and said that everything was fine because he would protect all the students. The student pressed herself against the teacher, causing him to laugh evilly. The classmates immediately noticed this and condemned the fact that Uyama was staring at the Sakura hills again. One of the students with brown hair and a panicked face said it was disgusting. "A dirty old man," the girl expressed sympathy for poor Sakura. Suddenly, a piece of wood flew onto the roof. Rikuto immediately realized something. On the roof, instead of a door, there was a huge barricade of brown pieces of wood. Nishi explained to Rikuto that it was a barricade to keep the monsters from getting in. They had all made it out of scrap materials. Not many, but what they had was what they had. Nishi pointed out to Rikuto that everyone here had escaped from the mysterious monsters. All of the students were scarred by events in the past. Nishi began his story. In the middle of the burning school building, they desperately ran to the roof. He also reminded Rikuto that they had luckily managed to barricade themselves in. Still, Nishi's face became embarrassed, and he closed it a bit, saying that there were laggards who didn't make it in time anyway. They begged to be let inside. Rikuto began to shout sharply that under the rubble, wounded bodies could be seen. The students were begging the lucky and fast familiar to let them in upstairs. They banged on the control door and tried to break in while other monsters cut them to pieces. The students were panicking, reaching out to squeeze through the barricade, but the only adult was saying that they couldn't open it. The student also pointed out this fact, saying that he was right, and if they tried to save them, they would be killed themselves. The students continued to make even attempts to reach each other, shouting that the monsters would soon come and kill them. Nishi could only watch this. Nishi only reached out his hand trying to stop the allies, but at one point, there was a loud scream from a monster. Afterwards, Nishi started to sweat. This was a situation where Nishi had to lower his hand and refuse to help. Nishi was telling all of this to Rikuto, saying that that was when he felt what he wanted to survive, what he didn't want to reveal. Nishi's hand was shaking like a dog after a bath. Rikuto only looked at his so-called friend in silence. Rikuto interrupted Nishi's musings, saying it wasn't his fault. Rikuto turned around looking at the goblin, saying that no one wants to die so horribly and pathetically. Rikuto himself also tells Nishi that he did his best to survive. Nishi was surprised to see the goblin and asked Rikuto, "So you could really kill him?" Nishi's face became embarrassed as he called Rikuto a badass. Nishi himself was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. It would never have occurred to him to kill goblins. Nishi was amazed at this. After all, in the cultured world, he was usually confident. Nishi started to look at his trembling hand and said that if he had only thought of such a solution, he could have saved those guys. Rikuto only remained coldly silent. The teacher abruptly shouted for everyone to gather here. A general assembly began. Rikuto and Nishi immediately heard this and immediately took notice. The teacher began to state that they should start by assessing the situation. Today around noon, strange monsters suddenly came out of their phones. Asking this to the students, Sakura raised her hand with the phone, indicating that the monster came out right from there. It would have been better if Sakura climbed out of there and got stuck. Sakura started clicking the unlock button on her phone, surprised that her phone's battery was dead. One of the classmates also notified the others that his phone was dead. The three musketeers also had their phones dead. In that case, Nishi also checked and made sure his phone was dead. He asked Rikuto how he was doing, where Rikuto showed him his broken phone, saying it was his. The teacher started to get angry and said that he couldn't even call for help. Rikuto wondered what that meant. The monsters came out of the phones and now all the phones were out of charge. Rikuto immediately realized that it must be connected somehow. Still, Rikuto continued to look at his phone, realizing that to top it all off, no one was coming out of his phone. Rikuto immediately assumed that it was because his phone was broken. The teacher began nervously shaking his hand, exclaiming, "Ah, they appeared out of nowhere." In any case, the teacher decided to remain calm. They decided to wait for the police or armed forces to rescue them. This immediately confused the students. Rikuto interrupted the teacher in a cold voice, saying that he must be joking. The teacher was immediately embarrassed by such an act. Rikuto began to tell everyone around him that the monsters came from phones, which meant that it was likely that they had appeared all over the city, not just in the school. The students immediately started talking to each other. Rikuto continued to tell the students that given the prevalence of phones in their day, it was likely that the same situation was happening all over the world. Rikuto himself doubts that the police or military are in a position to act now. This caused one of the students to grab his head. Nishi summarized and tried to clarify with Rikuto. Instead of sitting here, should they look for a safer place? Rikuto immediately confirmed this, saying that they should do so if they didn't want to die. At that moment, the first disgruntled one, that dumbass rooster, appeared. He proudly addressed Rikuto, calling him dude. The cockerel swung his legs at the students and asked Rikuto, since when did he start giving out orders? Takeda began to smile evilly. The angry cock, Takeda grabbed the devastated Rikuto by the scruff of the neck, suggesting that Rikuto wouldn't understand until he kicked his ass again. Moreover, Rooster Takeda was angry that Rikuto didn't respond to his exclamations. Rikuto continued to stare directly at the bully in silence and devastation. Rikuto couldn't understand what was wrong with this idiot and why he was talking such nonsense in a situation like this. Takeda continued to hold Rikuto by his clothes and asked why he was giving out orders in the first place. The other students immediately supported Takeda, telling Kurogane to be a little more modest. Nishi tried to encourage the other guys. Sakura supported Nishi's decision by suggesting that everyone stick together. Takeda continued to get angry and asked what was wrong with Rikuto. Takeda assumed that Rikuto was so scared that he couldn't make a sound. Rikuto continued to stare at Takeda devastated, imagining a chihuahua in his place. Rikuto realized that compared to the monster he had defeated, he was just an annoying fly. Takeda abruptly moved away from Rikuto and was surprised by his words. Rikuto looked at him coldly and asked the annoying fly not to pester him about any little thing, because it was annoying. Everyone around him was amazed at Rikuto's actions, and Takeda opened his mouth wide to look at his friend. Takeda was struck by lightning. Takeda immediately lunged at Rikuto with his fists, calling him an idiot. He asked Rikuto, who was he talking to? Nishi wanted to intervene, but Rikuto instantly stopped the idiot's punch with silence on his face. Rikuto then put his hand behind Takeda's shoulder and pulled him down. In the blink of an eye, Rikuto sealed Takeda's head right into the floor and pinned the idiot's arm. The blow was strong enough to break Takeda's nose. Rikuto held the idiot's hand while Nishi, who wanted to intervene, stood in bewilderment watching such a beautiful scene. All the girls and other students in the class were shocked by Rikuto's actions. Rikuto began to grab the idiot's arm harder and harder, but Takeda just called Rikuto a jerk and begged him to let go. Rikuto instantly stated, "Eh? How absurd!" Rikuto began to clasp his hand harder and with a blank stare asked everyone around him why he was afraid of him in the first place. Takeda started moving, violently shouting that he was about to kick Rikuto's face and more. In response, Rikuto only continued to slap the idiot's arm. He stared devastatedly into the soul of his opponent. At one point, something happened in Rikuto's soul, and he cripplingly proceeded to break the idiot's arm. The idiot started squirming and moaning in pain when Nishi yelled, "Stop!" Nishi immediately pulled Rikuto away from the bully, who immediately grabbed his arm and started whimpering like a girl. Nishi started looking at a disgruntled Rikuto, who didn't mind nailing Nishi as well. Nishi stated that Rikuto was a psycho who almost broke Takeda's arm. Still, Nishi now couldn't believe that he was now holding on to the guy who had been mentally and physically abused by the whole school. The students immediately began whispering amongst themselves and marveling at the fact that he had knocked Takeda down so easily. Takeda, shaking with fear and desperation, called Rikuto a jerk, and Takeda also promised to kill him. Nishi interrupted the idiot's shouting by saying that now was not the time to argue, and Takeda rightly called him a jerk and crawled away from them. Nishi also turned to Rikuto and said that it's all in the past, but Rikuto sarcastically said,
Of course.
Instead, Rikuto rushed off in the other direction, saying that they had better figure out what they could do better now. Takeda became even more angry with Rikuto as he began to instruct everyone again. Nishi turned to Uyama-sensei and asked him to continue discussing the next steps. The gym teacher was immediately embarrassed to hear the student. After a while, Nishi took full responsibility for the conversation and decided to summarize it by addressing the students and saying that there was nothing on the roof, and they also didn't know when help would arrive. In the worst-case scenario, help wouldn't show up at all. So Nishi concluded that they must find shelter at all costs. They need food, water, but Rikuto interrupted his friend, saying they should get weapons if possible. Sakura also raised her hand asking what they should do. She doubted that there was a safe place to go. Nishi also pointed out that that was the main problem. Rikuto said sharply that they needed to find out what was inside anyway. They can't start anything if they don't know if it's even possible to get out. Saito Shinjiro, a student, sharply stated that he was against it because it was too dangerous, and there might still be monsters inside the school. Saito kept telling the others to sit and wait for help. All the gym teacher noticed that Kurogane was talking, and they should at least check the corridor. The students immediately freaked out at this, and a student we know from Kare asked the others, "Are there any volunteers who will go into the monster's lair?" The PE teacher abruptly stated that Kurogane and Takeda would go and assess the building's surroundings. Takeda was immediately subjected to panic upon hearing this. Rikuto continued to stare silently at Takeda, who was ready to eat him. Takeda exclaimed, "Why should I go with him?" Takeda also pointed his finger at saying that he should lead by example in situations like this. The female classmates immediately pointed out that they were men and they should go. Takeda just called them rappers. Fair enough. Suddenly there was the painfully familiar sound of iron. The girls immediately looked at Kurogane, who had a crowbar in his hand, or rather a pipe. Takeda turned to Kurogane with a puzzled expression and asked if he was serious. Kurogane questioned Takeda. Serious in what way? Kurogane was convinced that the more they stayed here, the more the situation would worsen. They would either starve to death or go to feed the monsters. Either way, if they stayed here, death was imminent. Rikuto said he didn't want to. He refused to die. Kurogane had all the girls pining for him in no time, saying that in this case there was no choice but to act. Nishi also began to admire his classmate. He smiled. Taking his bow in its sheath, he stated that now Kurogane had said all was well. Kurogane is right. Kurogane put the sheath on himself and stated that he would go too. After all, there might still be survivors out there. And that's it for now. See you sometime tomorrow.